The story takes place in a huge mansion located in the isolated rural area of Jersey in the year 1945. In the residence lives a woman named Grace, alongside her two young children, Anne and Nicholas. The two children have a rare condition that prevents them from having any contact with sunlight. For this reason, Grace keeps all the windows covered with thick curtains so that no light enters the house, because if they are exposed to the sun, their skin develops painful blisters. Grace's husband, Charles, does not live with the family because he is serving as a soldier on the front lines of the war. He bought the mansion believing that there his wife and children would be safer, far from the conflict that was devastating Europe at that time. It had been almost a year and a half since Charles left, and during that time no news of him had arrived. One day, three strangers named Bertha, Edmund, and Lydia appear at the mansion looking for work, since the financial situation was difficult because of the war. Upon observing the size of the property, they realize that it would be impossible for Grace to take care of everything alone and hope that she will agree to hire them. Grace receives them in a cordial manner, as she had already been expecting the arrival of new employees after publishing an advertisement in the newspaper. Before making a decision, she questions them about their experience. The three claim to have considerable experience. Edmund usually works as a gardener, Bertha has experience managing household duties, and Lydia, who does not speak, assists with the general services of the house. Next, Grace leads them on a tour through the rooms of the mansion and mentions that lunch will be served at 1 in the afternoon and dinner at 7 in the evening. Before she could continue explaining the rules, Bertha reveals that they had already worked in that same house when it belonged to the previous owners, and that they still remembered the layout of the rooms, in case no major changes had occurred. Grace appears somewhat surprised, but replies that since her husband acquired the property, few alterations had been made. Convinced by the experience they demonstrated, she decides to hire Edmund as the gardener, Bertha as the housekeeper, and Lydia as the maid. Grace needed new staff because the previous ones had suddenly disappeared without leaving any trace. After that, she takes them to meet her children, and on the way explains the essential rules of the house. All the curtains must remain completely closed at all times and must never be left open, because sunlight represents a danger to the health of Anne and Nicholas. Whenever a door is opened, it must be closed and locked again. No room may remain unlocked, and all the keys will be under Bertha's responsibility. In addition to these rules, there is another equally important requirement. Grace cannot tolerate noise and wants the environment to remain silent at all times. Therefore, there is no radio or telephone in the residence. Although there was a piano in the mansion, Grace did not allow the children to play it because the sound could break the silence she demanded. The house also did not always have constant electricity, so everyone was accustomed to living in dim light. To illuminate the rooms, Grace mainly used candles since their light did not harm the children. During the walk through the corridors, she assigned the tasks, asking Edmund to take care of the garden, which had been neglected for a long time, while Bertha and Lydia accompanied her to meet Anne and Nicholas. Before entering the bedroom, Grace reinforced that all curtains still open should be completely closed. After the room was entirely dark, she carefully woke the children, who were still sleepy, and at that moment, Bertha and Lydia noticed that the children were praying, thus understanding that the family was extremely religious. After the brief introduction, Grace instructed Lydia to make sure the kitchen curtains remained closed, as it was already time for breakfast. During the meal, Nicholas complained about the toast, but Grace insisted that they finish everything. While Bertha remained at the table with the children, Grace called her outside because she wanted to discuss a matter. She found it strange that the three of them had appeared, since shortly before she had checked the mailbox and noticed that the letter with the job advertisement was still there. Normally, the mailman collected the correspondence every Wednesday, but up to that moment it had not happened, which made her question how they knew she was looking for employees if the advertisement had not even been published. Calmly, Bertha explained that it was evident that a residence of that size could not be managed alone, and since the financial situation was complicated because of the war, she, Edmund, and Lydia decided to take a chance and offer their services, believing that everything was merely coincidence. After the children finished breakfast, Grace began teaching them religious principles, highlighting that day the importance of honesty and stating that lying was a sin that should never be committed. However, Anne and Nicholas started playing and laughing with each other instead of paying attention, which made their mother irritated. As punishment, she forbade any fun and placed them in separate rooms to study without distraction. At first, the two resisted because they were afraid and confessed that they frequently heard sounds and saw strange apparitions in the house. Grace firmly stated that ghosts did not exist and maintained the decision to separate them. After making sure they were focused again on their lessons, Grace went to speak with Bertha and asked about Lydia, curious to know whether she had been born unable to speak. The answer surprised her because Lydia had spoken normally in the past and lost her voice only in recent years, although Bertha did not explain the reason. Soon after, Grace heard a boy crying and thought it was Nicholas, but when she checked, she saw that he was calmly reading a book. Concerned, she went to Anne, who also seemed calm and dedicated to her studies. Confused and uneasy, Grace asked if she had heard the crying, and Anne replied that the sound came from a ghost boy named Victor, who supposedly lived in the house and had already said that their family needed to leave. Anne said that it was not only Victor who lived there. According to her, the boy's parents and a blind elderly woman also lived in the house, although only Victor spoke. Grace treated everything as childish imagination and did not believe a single word her daughter said, ordering her to continue studying. As she was leaving the bedroom, she was startled to see an open door, something that completely contradicted the strict rules she herself had imposed, since every door had to remain closed and locked. Upon noticing her mother's reaction, Anne said that Victor had just passed through there, but Grace refused to accept that explanation and stated that it was not the work of any ghost, but rather Bertha's carelessness for not having locked it properly. That night, Nicholas was awakened by Anne, who asked him to look toward the bedroom window, and the boy was shocked to see that the curtain, which should never be opened, was completely wide open. Anne whispered that it had not been her, but Victor, who supposedly did that every night while they slept. The explanation made Nicholas nervous. He thought it had gone too far and wanted to call their mother. To prove she was not lying, Anne asked Victor to appear and touch her brother, and immediately, Nicholas felt something invisible brush against his face, which made him scream desperately. The scream reached Grace's bedroom, and she ran to see what was happening. Nicholas complained that Anne was trying to scare him, but she firmly denied it and insisted that the one who had touched his face was Victor. Already tired of those stories, Grace did not believe her and became furious with Anne for disturbing her brother and interrupting his sleep. She demanded that her daughter admit guilt and apologize. However, Anne maintained that she was innocent and refused to apologize for something she had not done, so Grace decided to extend the punishment and forced her to read the Bible until dawn. The next day, while resting downstairs, Grace heard footsteps coming from the upper floor, as if someone were running. She first thought it was Lydia, but when she looked through the window, she saw Lydia and Bertha in the garden, which left her wondering who could be upstairs. She went up to check and found Anne still carrying out the punishment, reading the Bible. She asked if she had heard the footsteps, and afraid of having the punishment increased, Anne lied, saying she had heard nothing, although her expression showed uneasiness. Pressed further, she eventually admitted that the noise came from Victor and pointed to the attic as the place where he would be hiding. Despite the repeated mentions of the boy and the other figures who supposedly shared the house with them, Grace remained skeptical, rejecting any idea of ghosts and believing that if something strange was happening, it could only be caused by real people. Convinced that there was an intruder in the mansion, she ordered Lydia and Edmund to search every room. The curtains, which always remained closed to protect the children from sunlight, were opened to illuminate the entire house and make the search easier. To keep Anne and Nicholas protected from the light, Grace placed them in a completely closed room and asked Bertha to stay with them while the search took place. Before they began, Anne showed a drawing she had made herself, in which 4 figures appeared: Victor, his parents, and a blind elderly woman, and on the sheet she had written out in full the number of times she claimed to have seen each of them. The figure Anne said she saw most frequently was the blind elderly woman, who according to her had appeared 14 times, while Victor had appeared only 5 times, although he was the only one who spoke with her. Even after looking at the drawing, Grace remained skeptical, convinced that everything was nothing more than childish imagination fueled by frightening stories, and she maintained her certainty that there was a real intruder in the mansion, demanding that every corner be carefully searched. After a long search, no one was found, and there was no sign of intrusion. However, Grace ended up discovering old photo albums, and as she flipped through them, she noticed images of people who seemed to be sleeping with their eyes closed. Shortly afterward, Bertha explained that those people were not sleeping but dead, since in the past there had been a custom of photographing the recently deceased, believing that their souls would remain alive through the images. The explanation deeply unsettled Grace, who ordered that all the photographs be removed from the house, saying she did not want that kind of reminder there. When the situation calmed down, Grace tried to distract herself by talking with Bertha and asked about the time when she had worked in the mansion. Bertha said that she had been the head housekeeper and that at the time the property had about 15 employees because of its large size. However, when the owner traveled to London and never returned, everything began to change. The employees left one by one after they stopped receiving their wages, leaving only Bertha, Edmund, and Lydia, who continued taking care of the place even without payment. In the year 1891, a tuberculosis outbreak struck the region and made staying there far too dangerous, forcing the three of them to leave in search of safety. Years later, moved by longing for the mansion, they returned, and to their luck, Grace agreed to hire them again. After Bertha retired to her room, saying that her memory was a little faulty and that she would rest, Grace suddenly heard the sound of a piano coming from the music room. Suspicious, she went there and was surprised to realize that the door was unlocked, contrary to the strict rules that determined that all rooms should remain closed. Feeling apprehensive, she entered holding a gun she had prepared in case there truly was an intruder, but when she opened the door, she found the room empty. Confused, she could not understand how the piano could have played by itself, so she closed the lid of the instrument and locked it firmly. At the moment she was about to leave, the door slammed violently against her face. Frightened and hurt, she tried to enter again, but this time it was locked from the inside. Without the key in hand, she called Bertha to bring a spare, and when she finally managed to open it, Grace was shocked again. The piano lid she had closed was open once more, and the room remained empty. From that moment on, her conviction began to waver, for she had always rejected Anne's stories about ghosts, but what she had just experienced made her admit that the house might be haunted. Overcome by fear, Grace decided to seek help from a priest to perform an exorcism. Even with the road covered by thick fog that morning, she left without thinking about the dangers around her. On the way, she encountered Edmund and told him that when the mansion had been purchased, the real estate agent had mentioned that there was a family buried on the property. Then she asked him to look for possible gravestones, especially with the name Victor and those of his relatives. After that, she continued alone, and the farther she went, the denser the fog became, making it difficult for her to find her way. In the midst of the confusion, she was startled by the silhouette of a man emerging from the mist, and to her astonishment, it was Charles, her husband. Many had said that he had died in the war, but there he was, alive before her. The surprise and joy made Grace forget about the priest, and she took Charles back home to reunite him with the children. Anne and Nicholas were radiant when they saw their father, happy to have the family reunited once again. When Grace called him to eat, Charles preferred to rest in the bedroom, silent and distant, as if he still carried the weight of the battlefield. The next day, Grace dressed Anne in a new dress she had sewn herself and asked her to be careful not to stain it. Before going to Charles's room, as he had continued without eating since the previous day, she locked her daughter's bedroom to keep her safe. When she returned, she was confronted with something terrifying. She saw a figure that looked like Anne, but with wrinkled and aged hands. As she approached, she realized it was the blind old woman imitating her daughter's voice. Overcome by panic and believing it was not Anne, Grace lunged forward and began strangling the figure. However, upon hearing the crying, she horrifically realized that she was squeezing her own daughter's neck. Anne burst into tears, shaken by her mother's action. Bertha rushed in upon hearing the screams and took the girl back to her room. After what had happened, Grace insisted that the blind woman had disguised herself as her daughter. She was completely convinced of what she had seen. Bertha tried to offer a sedative, but Grace refused and preferred to compose herself alone. Shortly afterward, she went to speak with Charles, and he revealed that he needed to return to the battlefield. Grace argued that the war had already ended, but he stated that his mission was not yet over. The argument left Grace outraged and devastated, for she had barely recovered the happiness of having her husband near. Desperate to prevent him from leaving again, she gave herself to him, pleading that he not abandon her once more. Even so, the next morning, Charles left without saying goodbye, leaving only sadness behind. Grace went out to look for him, but stopped when she heard Anne and Nicholas screaming inside the house. She ran back and found all the curtains missing, exposing the children to the sunlight. In panic, she tried to protect them and searched for shelter, but there were no curtains in any room. With no alternative, she blocked the windows with dark paintings and everything she could find to prevent the light from entering. She then accused the servants of hiding the curtains. However, Bertha, Edmund, and Lydia firmly denied it, and even suggested that perhaps Anne and Nicholas had been cured of the illness and that Grace had never realized it. This hypothesis enraged her even more. Convinced that they wanted to harm her children, she grabbed a gun and threatened them, demanding the house keys. Finally, Bertha handed over the keys and Grace expelled the three of them from the mansion. After the servants left, Grace took the keys and began searching every corner of the mansion for the missing curtains. By nightfall, she still had found nothing. Only one place remained unchecked, the attic. Upon entering, instead of the curtains, she found an old photograph dated December 1891. To her shock, the image showed Bertha, Edmund, and Lydia dead from tuberculosis. At that moment, the truth began to reveal itself. The three who had been by her side all along were not living people, but spirits. Meanwhile, Anne and Nicholas, distressed, decided to run away to look for their father. During the attempt to escape, they found 3 gravestones with the names Bertha, Edmund, and Lydia engraved on them. When they soon afterwards saw the 3 figures appear before them as apparitions, they panicked, ran back inside the house, and called for their mother. Hearing the screams, Grace told them to hide and ran to lock the house, trying to keep the spirits outside. Before she could join her children, Bertha appeared and stated that they did not wish to cause any harm. She said that Grace needed to accept that the world of the dead coexisted with that of the living. Grace rejected that idea and demanded that they leave her family alone. Bertha then explained that the curtains had not been removed by them, but by the intruders Grace had suspected from the beginning, people who were inside the house with her and the children, and who would eventually find the 3 of them. Before she could fully understand, Grace heard new screams. The blind old woman had located Anne and Nicholas hiding inside a wardrobe. Bertha insisted that Grace try to communicate with the intruders. When she reached the bedroom, Grace was paralyzed because besides her children there were the blind woman, Victor's parents, and 2 other people. It was revealed that the elderly woman was a medium and that they were all participating in a seance. During the ritual, the medium sought contact with Anne's spirit. Question after question brought forth the painful truth. Anne and Nicholas were already dead, and the cause was also revealed. After receiving the news that Charles had died in the war, Grace lost control. Overwhelmed by despair, she suffocated her own children with pillows and then pointed the shotgun at herself. Upon hearing this revelation, Grace was deeply shaken and finally understood that she and the children had been dead for a long time. The people she believed to be intruders were actually Victor's family, alive and newly arrived at the house. The strange events she had judged to be supernatural, doors opening and unfamiliar voices, were merely normal actions of the new residents. In reality, it was Victor's family who felt haunted, especially when Grace, in denial, overturned furniture and scattered papers. Phenomena that to the living seemed like paranormal activity. Even the constant fog surrounding the mansion was not simple weather, but a symbol that Grace and her children no longer belonged to the world of the living. It was also discovered that Lydia remained silent due to the profound shock of realizing that she had died of tuberculosis, along with Bertha and Edmund, a trauma that prevented her from speaking again. Unable to endure the disturbances, Victor's family decided to leave the house. Meanwhile, Grace finally accepted the painful truth that she, Anne, and Nicholas were dead. Remorseful, she embraced her children and asked forgiveness for having led them to death. But instead of departing, she chose to see that condition as a second chance granted by God. She convinced herself that even as spirits they could remain together. Anne and Nicholas realized that they were no longer ill, and for the first time felt the warmth of sunlight without fear. Grace then firmly declared that the mansion would be theirs forever, and that no matter who came afterward, they would never leave the place. Thus, the story comes to an end.